All right, this second video is going to go along with our second task sheet, 868. We're going to be doing some fuel pressure testing here real quick. The first part of this task sheet is asking for specs. Same thing with the first one. If you want to use my truck, 99 GMC Sierra 2500 5.3, you're more than welcome to do that. If you want to look up the specs for your vehicle, you can do that too. But it's asking for a few different kind of pressure specs. You may not find all of these, just kind of depends on what they give you. You may not find a deadhead pressure, especially on a newer car. So a deadhead pressure is going to be if we have a return system, if we crimp off the return line to the tank to see kind of what our max pressure is going to be. But and that's something that there's a couple different ways we can do that. You can use, you can put a hose in there in your return line that's got a valve in it, so you can turn the valve off, or you can take a pair of like needle nose vice grips and crimp that line off. I don't have a hose with a valve in it, and my truck being on the older side, I'm not going to crimp that line off. I don't want to distort it or crack it or any of that kind of thing, so I'm just going to leave that one alone. But we'll hook up the pressure gauge here in just a second and get a key on engine off, engine idle, and all that kind of stuff measured up, and then we'll get this task sheet filled out. So we'll move over here to the truck. So we're under the hood of the truck here. I got some of the covers off already. This truck's pretty easy to do fuel pressure on. We can see part of our fuel rail here. We've got this crossover, and let's see. The rest of our fuel rail, you can kind of see the end of it there. There's our fuel pressure regulator we were talking about the other day. It's right in the side of the rail, and it's got vacuum off the manifold. But here is our test port. Got a little cap on there, keep all the dust and dirt and crap out of there. So we can just hook up our adapter straight to our fuel rail. We don't have to break into the lines, do anything weird like that. So we just got to thread one of our fittings onto there and hook our gauge up. Now, I had to borrow a fuel pressure gauge from the school. This is one of the ones that I grabbed out of our classroom. So you can see it's got quite a few adapters, different hoses for hooking up to different vehicles. So some of these make it a whole lot easier than some of the others. You may have to use some of these adapters and tap into a line if you don't have a fitting like on my truck. So I have my own much more basic fuel pressure gauge. Unfortunately, I'm missing a seal for it, so it doesn't seal up. That's why I had to grab this one. My kit doesn't have any of this stuff. It's got like one or two of these thread-on hoses, and that's about it. But I'm missing the seal that goes down in there. So we'll get this hooked up and see what kind of pressure we're making. All right, so we got our gauge hooked up. We're in our fitting right there. This is our gauge, and all of these are going to have this little kind of block on here. This black hose is our feed from our fuel rail, and then this clear hose is a pressure bleed. So we hit this little button. If this gauge has any pressure in it, it's going to release fuel out through this clear hose. And we can use that just for clearing out the gauge, or we can actually use that when the car's running. We can siphon a little gas off of this if we want to take a fuel sample, or we can use this to kind of get a volume reading if we need to. And that is one of the things that it asks about in this task sheet. And that may be another hard spec to find. A lot of times we would just hit that button and release some of the fuel pressure, and if the vehicle died, most like 9 times out of 10, you didn't have enough volume if your vehicle died after hitting that button. But that's one of those tests that, you know, it's not really super accurate, but most of the time it's correct. So we'll do a key on engine off here real quick and see what our pump's making on a prime. So we got our gauge kind of crammed in here. I'm going to go and turn the key on real quick and see what kind of prime pressure we got. Key on engine off. So when you first turn the key on, you're going to want to see that initial, they call it a prime. So anytime you turn that key on, we're going to give it just a couple of seconds, a shot of pressure to get our fuel system ready. So you always want to see that when you first turn the key on, and you want it to hold pressure too. If you get that prime and all of our pressure drops back off again, we got a problem probably with the pump itself, leaking fuel back into the tank. So this looks good. We got 50 pounds on prime, so we will I'll go and attempt to give this thing a crank. It's kind of hard to get this stuff to set up right, but we'll give it a shot. So we've got our truck running right now. We're running at about 48 or so PSI. Looking at the specs on this truck, it really only gives a key on engine off spec for the most part, and that's 55 to 62 PSI. So we're actually running a little bit lower than specification. I don't really have any drivability or starting problems with this truck, so I'm not terribly worried about it. It is an aftermarket pump, so that may have something to do with it. Now there's a couple things that we could do. We could give this some RPMs. Let's see if our pressure comes up at all. So you can see we get some RPMs in there. Our fuel pressure regulator is going to bump our pressure up a little bit. You could take this vacuum hose off of here. If I had a vacuum pump, we could apply some vacuum to our regulator and see how much movement we get on our gauge. But guys, for this task sheet, that's about the gist of it. It's hooking up and taking a couple of these measurements. Again, if we wanted deadhead pressure, we'd have to come over here. It's kind of hard to see. We've got two fuel lines. We've got our top one right here. This is our feed into the rail. And then the bottom one is our return. So we'd have to block off that return somehow, either with some adapters or pinching that hose off. So that's not something that I'm going to do today, but as long as you guys kind of get the idea how to do that. But pull up all data, get some specs, and then we can try and fill out that task sheet the best you can. And that's going to wrap us up for today. So thank you.